A pale blue sky stretched endlessly over the Indian Ocean as HMS Queen Elizabeth sliced through the waters with majestic precision. The aircraft carrier, flagship of the Royal Navy, was on a high-profile deployment as part of a multinational naval task group. The mission, supporting freedom of navigation and reinforcing maritime presence in contested regions, was routine in principle, but carried undercurrents of tension few on board could ignore. Amid shimmering heat and salty air, the steel behemoth carried more than aircraft and sailors. It bore a message. Commander Alex Shaw stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the horizon. Tall, sharp-featured, with 30 years in uniform, he had the steady demeanor of a man long accustomed to tightropes between diplomacy and danger. He spoke little when observing. Every quiet second was a calculation. Behind him, Lieutenant Emma Reeves monitored radar signatures, her fingers dancing across the console. A quiet ping sounded, faint but unmistakable. Something was shadowing them. Unidentified vessel bearing 085, appears to be maintaining parallel course, Reeves reported, her voice even but alert. Shaw leaned over her screen. The blip wasn't close enough to alarm, but it wasn't drifting away either. That was what concerned him. Vessels in open seas didn't casually mirror warship trajectories unless they had a reason. "Get a visual from Eagle 2, Shaw said. Minutes later, a Merlin helicopter took off from the flight deck, banking hard to the east. The aircraft's camera feed soon flickered to life across bridge monitors, revealing a gray hull with distinctive lines. A Chinese Type 052D destroyer, stealthy and modern. It moved like a shadow cast across the water. Its distance was legal. Its presence was not casual. Chief Flight Deck Officer Marcus Avery appeared at the bridge threshold. "Sir, we've had reports from the fleet. Same ship's been seen trailing behind us for the last 20 hours. Always outside provocation range." Shaw nodded slowly. The Chinese weren't strangers to shadow games, especially in contested zones, but this wasn't the South China Sea. This was neutral water. The game was now psychological, not territorial. "Helm, maintain course," Shaw ordered. "Don't give them reason to claim interference." There was a time when such maneuvers would be considered hostile. But the modern maritime theater had evolved. It wasn't about cannon fire and torpedoes. It was about surveillance, electronic sniffing, and data harvesting. Quiet wars waged in the electromagnetic spectrum. Later that day, as the orange sun dipped low over the ocean, the air buzzed with tension. On the flight deck, F-35B Lightning II jets stood in perfect formation. Reeves joined Shaw at the bridge once more, her brow furrowed. "Sir, we're detecting elevated ELINT signals. That ship's not just watching us. It's recording. They're likely capturing emissions from our radars and even the F-35's data links." That changed things. "They're fishing for secrets," Shaw murmured, his voice hardening. The Chinese ship had drifted closer, still outside the confrontation bubble, but just enough to smell the carrier's electronic fingerprint. Intelligence theft without setting off alarm bells. Just another day in the gray zone of modern naval conflict. Orders were passed silently. Crew members moved with heightened purpose. The carrier strike group subtly adjusted formation. The HMS Diamond, a Type 45 destroyer, began veering off slightly to mirror the Chinese vessel's movements. The idea wasn't to threaten, but to let them know they were being watched too. Down in the carrier's operations center, technicians monitored the spectral landscape, frequencies, signals, pings, pulses. It was a battlefield without explosions, but just as consequential. Dinner that evening was quiet in the officers' mess. The usual banter was absent. Even among those not on duty, the atmosphere carried weight. Every crew member knew the feeling. They were being hunted, studied, not by an enemy in the traditional sense, but by an increasingly assertive power eager to test limits. Later that night, Shaw stood alone on the observation deck. The Chinese destroyer, now faintly visible under moonlight, looked like a ghost on the horizon, neither welcome nor forbidden, just there, watching, learning. His comm crackled. Reeves again. "Sir, just received classified relay from Whitehall. GCHQ confirms the ship is transmitting bursts to satellites, likely encrypted telemetry from our systems." Shaw exhaled slowly. It was official. The shadow was not passive. This was targeted. "Time to escalate our posture," he said quietly, eyes still locked on the sea. "But not with words." Far below, engineers began prepping the countermeasures suite. On the deck, the next flight cycle of F-35's-B rolled out for early morning sorties. The carrier, silent and darkened, moved forward like a lion, feigning sleep. The message was clear. They had seen enough. Tomorrow they would respond. Not with missiles, but with maneuvers, signals, and presence. The dance had begun, and the Queen would not retreat. The next dawn would bring a confrontation, but not of fire, of message. And HMS Queen Elizabeth would speak loudest without saying a word. The sea was unusually calm as the sun climbed higher, casting a golden sheen across the carrier's flight deck. Yet beneath that placid surface, tension coursed through the veins of HMS Queen Elizabeth like a live wire. Commander Alex Shaw stood on the bridge again, flanked by Lieutenant Reeves, both staring at the ghost still trailing them. A Chinese Type 052D destroyer, now notably closer than the day before. Shaw had ordered the F-35B patrols to continue, but now each sortie carried more weight. It wasn't just routine training anymore, it was a performance, carefully choreographed for an audience. The Chinese vessel didn't respond, didn't veer away. It simply lingered, collecting information, daring the carrier group to blink first. Below deck in the Combat Information Center, the flickering screens painted a fuller picture. Chinese radar sweeps were being picked up intermittently, not aimed for targeting, but mapping. A subtle difference, but enough to confirm the obvious. They were actively probing. The Royal Navy had been followed before, even shadowed. But this was something else. This was surveillance wrapped in theater, a display of presence engineered to provoke a reaction. A new name entered the scene. Lieutenant Commander Isaac Trent, electronic warfare officer. Sharp, analytical, with an intense stare that rarely softened, Trent had been tasked with decoding the Chinese ship's electronic emissions. His conclusion was troubling. "They're running a full-frequency sweep of our carrier's systems, everything from radar bands to encrypted comms. It's not passive listening. They're cataloging." Shaw nodded grimly. "Are they relaying the data?" "Every few hours. Short encrypted bursts, satellite-directed, high bandwidth." The carrier's intelligence section had already confirmed the same. It wasn't just the Chinese ship operating alone. Somewhere up there, perhaps far away, a ground team or satellite cluster was receiving and analyzing every byte. The challenge was clear. The enemy was stealing a glance behind the curtain of the UK's most advanced naval asset. That morning, under a rising sun, HMS Queen Elizabeth made a subtle course adjustment. Not aggressive, just strategic. And HMS Diamond, flanking to starboard, mirrored the Chinese ship's behavior, intentionally moving into a parallel track at a closer distance. The message was simple. We see you. Up on the flight deck, Petty Officer Mariah Jennings oversaw aircraft preparation. She had served in Afghanistan and Syria, but she admitted that the silent tension of this mission was unlike anything she had known. "It's like a game of chess," she told a junior crewman, "except we don't know what their next piece is or what they really want." Shaw knew what they wanted. The F-35's-Bs, with their stealth profiles, cutting-edge sensors, and next-gen warfare systems, were a gold mine for foreign military intelligence. Even without crossing into hostile airspace, merely observing their operation, deployment patterns, and coordination with the carrier offered valuable insight to adversaries. By mid-afternoon, one of the patrol F-35Bs returned with troubling footage. While looping a wide arc around the task group's perimeter, the pilot had captured infrared signatures of another ship, a second Chinese destroyer, farther out, but closing. This was no longer a passive shadowing. This was deliberate encirclement. In the CIC, tension thickened. Lieutenant Reeves plotted the new contact. Second vessel on approach vector, ETA 2 hours, likely working in tandem. Trent leaned over his station. This confirms what we feared. They're trying to box us in, create a multi-angle ELINT collection zone. Shaw turned away from the screen, issuing calm but firm orders. Bring HMS Kent and Richmond into forward defensive formation. No weapons lock, just posture. Let's remind them we're not sailing alone. As night fell, the once open waters felt constricted. The Chinese vessels had coordinated their movements so effectively it was almost mathematical, like someone had choreographed their positions with a spreadsheet. For the Royal Navy, it was a balancing act. Maintain freedom of navigation. Avoid escalation, yet refuse to be boxed into silence. Trent initiated electronic countermeasures, subtle pulses meant to obscure the finer signals emanating from the carrier. It wouldn't blind their adversaries, but it would garble their reception, a technological middle finger in the language of modern warfare. And yet, in this near-silent standoff, the psychological game was just as crucial. Shaw understood that everything they did now would echo not just on water, but across diplomatic channels. Missteps had consequences, but so did silence. Then came the moment no one expected. A radio transmission, encrypted in Mandarin, but immediately flagged. The Chinese destroyer had opened a secure channel. It was brief, formal, and contained a single line. Observing compliance with international passage. No hostile intent. It was a masterstroke of ambiguity. A declaration that absolved them of blame while continuing the operation. A kind of maritime poker face. Shaw looked at Reeves. They've made their move, she responded without hesitation. Time to make ours? He nodded. Prepare a coordinated overflight. F-35s in diamond formation. No low passes. Keep altitude. Just a flyover. It was the most calculated show of presence they could deliver. Quiet, legal, but undeniably dominant. That night, under a blanket of stars, 4 F-35Bs roared from the deck. Lights off, stealth on. They didn't cross the Chinese ships. They didn't break international law. But they flew in perfect formation, above and beyond, like shadows of a warning etched into the sky. When they returned, there was no applause, just silence, and the quiet knowledge that the message had been sent. The next morning, the second Chinese ship had vanished from radar. The first still trailed behind, but farther now, more cautious. The balance had shifted, for now. The sun had barely risen when a new alert chimed in the Combat Information Center, this time from HMS Kent. A high-frequency sonar ping, distinct and unmistakable, had pulsed through the water from a direction neither Chinese vessel had occupied. It was brief, a single tone, but it sent shockwaves of concern through every level of the carrier strike group. It meant something else was nearby. Something submerged. Commander Alex Shaw stood over the sonar display, his brow furrowed as the signal was replayed and isolated. The signature was consistent with a Yuan-class Chinese submarine, quiet, modern, and deadly. If the two surface ships had been playing chess above water, the sudden appearance of a potential submarine shifted the game into something far more dangerous. Lieutenant Commander Isaac Trent wasted no time running spectrum analysis through the EW suite. It's smart. It didn't stay in transmission mode. Just one ping and silence. It was a call and response, testing our underwater awareness. Did we respond? Shaw asked, already knowing the answer. We didn't need to, Trent replied, but I think it wanted us to know it was there. Petty Officer Mariah Jennings, now stationed on the flight deck once again, oversaw the readying of a Merlin helicopter configured for anti-submarine warfare. Its sonar array and depth charges were not intended for aggression, but rather for deterrence. The cat-and-mouse game had entered a third dimension. Orders were given. The Merlin launched with mechanical grace, dipping low across the waves before deploying its sonar buoy array. Below, the sea was vast and black, and if there was a submarine, it was already nestled into the folds of the ocean like a predator waiting to strike. On the bridge, Shaw briefed his officers. "The Chinese want us to overreact. A submarine suddenly appearing during a surveillance mission? It's a message, showing they can strike without warning. But they won't fire first. They want us to blink." Lieutenant Reeves added, "They're establishing presence in air, on the surface, and below it. Full spectrum pressure." The Admiral, patched in remotely via secure line from Portsmouth, gave clear instructions. Maintain deterrence posture, no hostile moves, but be prepared for escalation. Diplomats had already begun laying the groundwork for back-channel communication, but the carrier strike group couldn't wait on negotiations. They had to act now, decisively, but wisely. By mid-morning, HMS Richmond and Kent had repositioned. Their sonar systems worked in tandem, attempting to triangulate the possible submarine. It was like searching for a whisper in a cathedral. But slowly, a shape began to emerge on their systems, slow-moving, evasive, keeping to a trench deeper than most submarines typically ventured. No doubt now, it was real. The tension among the crew became palpable. For many, this was their first time being shadowed by an enemy submarine. It wasn't just a strategic challenge, it was psychological warfare. Back in the Combat Information Center, Trent picked up another brief radio burst. Encrypted again, but this time sent not from the surface destroyers, but through a deep-sea communication channel. No response came after, a signal fired into the abyss. "What do they want?" Reeves murmured. Shaw answered without looking up. "Leverage. They're probing how far they can push. If they can operate undetected below our most advanced carrier, they've proven a point, not just to us, but to the world." There was a long silence. Then Shaw made a call. "Send out a second Merlin, this time with passive tracking buoys in a wide pattern, and arm HMS Diamond's Sea Viper missiles. I don't want to use them, but I want them to know we can." Jennings watched as the second Merlin lifted off the deck, slicing through the now bright sky. Everyone on that ship knew what was at stake. They weren't playing at war, they were sitting on the edge of it. The hours passed. Then, without warning, the sonar contact began to fade. No torpedo trail, no cavitation burst. Just silence. The submarine had either slipped out or gone completely dark. Either way, it was gone, or hiding again. Then the comms lit up. The lead Chinese destroyer transmitted another formal statement. "Routine operations complete. Withdrawing presence." And just like that, it turned. Within the hour, the second ship did the same. Reeves stared at the tactical display. "They're really leaving?" Shaw nodded slowly. "They got what they came for. They tested our readiness, our patience, our protocols. And they showed the world that they could walk right up to the gates of our most powerful carrier without firing a shot." Trent added, "And now they've slipped away, knowing we watched and responded, but didn't fall into their trap." Shaw looked out over the horizon, where the two ships were fading into the haze. "Sometimes strength isn't in the missile you fire, it's in the one you hold back." Down on the deck, Jennings oversaw the recovery of the Merlins. The mood was still tense, but there was pride in the silence. Pride in how close they'd come to the edge and how they'd walked away unscathed because of discipline, skill, and a quiet understanding of power. The sea was calm again, but it had been changed. The message was sent on both sides. Neither side had won, but neither side had backed down, and in modern warfare sometimes, that's victory enough.